given we're tight on time. So yes, thank you everyone for coming today to join this Climate Action Week event. It's called Divesting from Climate Destruction, How to Stop Banks Funding Fossil Fuel Expansion. And we've timed this event to coincide with the lead up to the Banking Summit, which happens next week. And it's one of the most significant events for corporate banking in Australia, where banks come together to discuss issues facing the industry. And we think that continuing to fund fossil fuels is one of them. Before I get into it, I want to acknowledge that I myself are calling in from stolen land. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and want to recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. And that there is no climate justice without First Nations justice or gender justice, and we approach that issue with this lens. My name's Catherine Tu. I'm the Head of Campaigns and Policy at ActionAid Australia. We're hosting this webinar in partnership with the Australian Conservation Foundation and Market Forces to bring this important issue to you, and also to have three very knowledgeable speakers who can speak on this topic. Because a feminist future is one that's fossil free. But even now, Australian banks are funneling money to the coal, oil and gas companies that are fueling the climate crisis. And as many of you would know on this call, scientists have told us that to keep warming to 1.5 degrees, there's no room for any fossil fuel expansion. So no room for any new coal, oil or gas. And last year in 2024, we're seeing the impacts of this. So it was the first year that we exceeded temperatures over a 12-month period for 1.5 degrees. And we're already seeing the catastrophic impacts of that from floods and cyclones, and to people in Australia, in northern New South Wales and in Queensland who are experiencing the impacts. We're thinking of you, and our hearts go out to you as well. But despite that, despite the problem, we're still seeing Australian banks pour billions to the fossil fuel industry. So according to Market Forces, in 2023 alone, banks gave over $3 billion to fossil fuels. And apart from those impacts which drive inequality, the industry is also exploiting women and First Nations people in Australia and in low-income countries. These projects are violating the rights of local communities, and they're causing climate destruction. And women, First Nations people and other marginalised groups are feeling these impacts the worst. But communities are also on the forefront for the movement of justice. So we're seeing women and affected communities across Australia and the Pacific and globally using Indigenous knowledge to drive climate solutions, to build resilience in the front lines, and they're also calling for an end to fossil fuels. And banks, while we will talk about how much more work they have to do to stop financing fossil fuels, we also want to acknowledge that they've made some important progress over the years in reducing financing to fossil fuels. And given the current global context where we're seeing major global banks in the US, in Canada, and also in Australia, for example, Macquarie Bank, lead the Net Zero Banking Alliance, there's never been a more important time for us to keep the pressure up on banks to continue to improve their policies. And to stop financing fossil fuels. And for those who don't know, the Net Zero Banking Alliance is a UN-sponsored initiative to encourage financial institutions to move financing away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And banks around the world are allegedly withdrawing because of fear of criticism from Trump. So I've spoken a lot, but to hear more about fossil fuel financing, the impacts on women and First Nations communities, and more importantly, what we can do about it, we're very fortunate today to be joined by some amazing speakers tonight. So we'll hear from Josie Alec, who's the First Nations lead for the Australian Conservation Foundation, Rachel Dobrich, who's the campaign manager at ActionAid Australia, Carl Robertson, banks analyst at Market Forces. And you might have seen that Jonathan Moylan from Australian Conservation Foundation also hoped to join us, but is unwell tonight. So please do come up with questions, because we'll have time for a Q&A at the end, and put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. And you're also welcome to share any thoughts or reflections you have with speakers in the chat. But as always, please be respectful. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Josie Alec. Josie is a proud Kumara Mathudunaram woman. She's a passionate teacher, artist, and singer-songwriter, and she's the Australian Conservation Foundation's First Nations lead and serves on the board of directors of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, Western Australia. She's the founder of two Pilbara-based businesses, Indigi Arts Cultural Creativeness, which focuses on cultural demonstrations and consultation, enhancing community connections, inspirational speaking, and Indigenous artwork. The Jumi factory utilises centuries of traditional plant knowledge to create skincare and cosmetics. Josie's the daughter of a traditional healer and was taught from an early age about the traditional uses of native plants and their benefits. She was the first Pilbara resident to take traditional bush medicine into the commercial world. So today, Josie will share with us how bank decisions to lend to Woodside's activities are impacting First Nations people, Murujuga, and their land and sea country. Thanks for being with us, Josie.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and welcome everybody. I have had laryngitis, so I'm just getting over that now, but I'm really happy to be here and to be speaking at this webinar. It's really important that we share our stories and we keep sharing our stories to everybody and anybody who's going to listen to them. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar people here in Perth, where I'm meeting today and where I'm here at. And hello to Ian. I saw you on there. Hi. One of our great people that without supporters of our campaigns, we can't, it's very hard to keep going and doing the work that we do. So, supporting us and everybody here is just amazing, and I just want to recognise that. So firstly, I'd like to, before I give you a little bit of my story, I'd like to sing you a song which is from my country and from that my elders and I translated, and it's the river song. So here we go, and hopefully you can hear these the tapsticks. Nandari bangari na unduala, babu nuangai unduala, kwai ganangari ma unduala, unduala wanganjari. Kwai turu ave ganangari ma, kwai ganangari ma, ganangari ma, kwai turu ave ganangari ma. Wunduwala baba nuangai, wunduwala baba nuangai, wunduwala baba nuangai. So that's it there. Thank you. So just to just to set the scene about where I come from. I was born in Roban, a little town just up from just near Karratha. I'm part of the stolen generation, so I came back to my mum when I was younger, learnt a little bit, went back, sort of had that sort of very sort of blessed best life. So I sort of was taken away, but I grew up with really amazing foster parents, who always said, go back to your people, who had given you a great education, go back to your people, use it. And so I did. I went back. I actually brought my kids up back with my mum as well when they were young. And, we learn about our law, we learn about our culture. And mostly the main thing was for me was to learn about my connection to country and what that meant to me. So it was, it was really one of the telltale signs of when I started connecting with the rock art at Murujuga and, finding my lineage and how we were all connected to that rock art and how amazingly special that connection is, especially as a traditional woman, and learning law from my mum, putting my sons through law, doing ceremony on country and really grounding yourself in that that life after, living in Perth and living in a sort of in the city, sort of a white man's world, I suppose you could say. Because I was with white foster parents, and I had a very, we had a black and white family, and so my parents fostered three Aboriginal kids and adopted another son, but they had three girls of their own. So there was, we were very I suppose multicultural family we grew up in. So basically, when I had found my connection, and especially like to the rock art, working working with the rock art, the rock art is really, really important to the song lines that run through the whole of Australia, especially in Murujuga. And Murujuga is sort of just on the Burrup Peninsula in just near Dampier, outside of Karratha. And that peninsula has over 2 million uh, pieces of rock art in on it. It's the world's biggest rock art collection. And when you say that, people just, we gloss over it sometimes, but that's amazing. You think about it with the rock art that is there, and it's the biggest in the world. And then we've got the biggest gas company in the world sitting right on the doorstep, who've pulled up rock art, who have put it basically in a prison compound, displaced it from where it should be, where it's been for millennia, since the dawn of time. These stories on the rocks are so incredibly intricate to the way that we all live. And, and I always say they are there with the stories for longevity and sustainability of all life on Earth. That's what they teach us, and that's what the gifts they give us. And when we walk in that country, especially as traditional owners and as women, because we were cut off a while ago when Woodside first came and the mining companies came. They cut a lot of the women's stories out of all the cultural heritage management plans, or all the stuff that they did. Basically, they had particular stories and then wouldn't listen to other stories. Um, Murujuga was once just the man's area where only men went, but you can't have a creation story without women. We are the creators, and so we carry the life, we carry, that the water, the amniotic fluid that, that is creation, and carries the babies. And so without that, this is what what some of the rock art holds there, is the creation stories that run through from here to, all the way over to the other side of the country, to the other side of the world. And when we're talking about creation beings, of a time where, there was a time where none of us were here. The creation beings were here, and the creation of the world um, comes from places like Murujuga, where they were set in stone for so long, and the stories are there of what was around. Um, and the um, just the feeling of the that connection that you have as a traditional custodian, and especially as a woman who holds a footprint to that country, and loves those gifts. There's so much about it. We started, I suppose, my niece and I started, had no idea about what was actually going on with Woodside. And my niece actually was one of the, she was actually a chair of Murujuga, which was Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation, who dealt with Woodside and what was going on. She had no idea about all the expansion plans that they'd had back then. And then nobody knew from up in, no one knew none of the traditional custodians knew what their plans were for expansion. When there was, I think it was Mark McGowan came up and said, that we can coexist with industry and culture can coexist. You know, no, it can't. It's not at all. Not when you're ripping out the heart of culture out of our ground, which is, very important rock art, which means, a lot to the people, and especially the women and our law, um, that had been buried for so long. So we we basically were working with the rocks for a long time, and then it was only that people were actually were doing rallies down in Perth. Like that's 1,500 kilometers away from where we are up in the northwest. And so, that there was people doing rallies against Woodside. There was, all of these campaigns going on we had no idea about. And it would just happen to that my niece was at one of these ones and sort of put her hand up and went, I'm Matathunia. And they went, oh, okay, we need to talk to you. And then I got a phone call and she's like, Arnie, these might want to come and see you. They want to know if they can camp in your backyard. I said, yep, no worries. So I had some fellas come over. They drove up 1,500 Ks, four of them, knocked on my door. I welcomed them in. And one of them he just started telling us about what was going on. And I rang my niece and I said, you've got to get here, got to come over here right now. Like we were crying, bawling our eyes out because we had no idea what was happening with the extension, with more destruction of sea country, the whale songlines, the turtles, everything that they had in plan. And the more information that we got, the worse it was. Like we were devastated, absolutely devastated. And so basically we started this campaign called Save Our Songlines in 2021, and that was to basically save our songlines. We had no money whatsoever. We had nothing. We just had the will to do what we had to do as women, and as women who are traditionally, as traditional custodians and obligated to look after that place. We went in fighting this big company. We had no idea, like at the time, we knew they were there. We knew they were a big company, big mining company, but we had no idea of the beast that we were just about to, launch, launch it all we had, at them. But what happened is that and I say this all the time, is they had all the money in the world, but we had all our culture. We had our ancestors behind us. And I suppose that's what got us to telling our story. When the World Heritage listing was there, we told our story to the people at Morajuga, and to the World Heritage, but they didn't put it in. And so we went to Geneva and we went to the Indigenous rights, for the panel for Indigenous rights. So we actually made it to Geneva that next year. And so my niece and I went there and we spoke about our story, and we told them about how we basically got shunted, and how everything that we'd been doing with the country and everything, all the knowledge that we received and the information we received, especially as women, just was glazed over by the corporation and by the likes of Woodside. They wouldn't listen, they wouldn't consult. We talk about, FPIC has become a very big thing, the free, prior and informed consent. So then, we started telling our story, and then we realized, these guys are actually backed by investors, by people who have got a lot of money, of course. And these people that are giving money don't even know what they're giving money to. They're giving money to people that are destructing our law and culture, that are destructing our environment right there in our country. We smell it from where we live. Like all my kids live up there and my grandkids and everybody, you can smell it when there's, when there's something that's not right out there, and they're going off in those big smokestacks. and the fire stacks that they've got there, you can see the the gloomy smoke that comes across, the whole area when they're burning off. And they usually do it at night time. Sometimes they've got to do it during the day. But it's and this is the more that we got into this, information sharing and, thinking about what was going on, the more that we were like, we just went down this rabbit hole of and found out all of this stuff, that was going on. There was rock art, acid testing on our rock art. So not only are they pulling rock art out, um, and displacing it in places, and in some instances crushing it up and using it for something else. But they were also, there was also uh, the rock art, the acid rain that comes out of the emissions. This we were talking about the emissions, and we're talking about how much poison is going into the air there, and then it rains, and then it drops on the rock art. There is we've got a testing paper that we'll share with everybody about how a good friend of mine, John Smith, did a acid testing, and this has been done for over years and years and years. And there's been people working on this for so many years, just behind the scenes, working tediously to try and, get this information out, break it down. And the likes of Woodside have been so clever in, they're very clever in glazing over things and sweeping things under the rug and doing things sort of underhandedly that, even my people have been, sort of coerced in a manner of, speaking, they've been coerced into, signing paperwork that they had no idea about. You're talking about old fellas that are sitting around and, they're meant to be talking up for that country. But when you've got, you know, there are people coming in and talking at them with all of this stuff that they don't even understand. And then they've just got to sign a piece of paper at the end of at the end of the day, say they've been there, they get their pay, that's it. They go. But sometimes they've slept through some of the stuff because they can't understand it. And a lot of them that our elders, didn't even get to read and write properly. So how could they understand policies and cultural heritage management plans that are this big? It's you've got to have a university degree to understand some of it. So it's it was a big thing for us to actually get this out and defy all odds, I suppose, in a way, to do a campaign that was in our own country, that where every second person works for the mining company in your own town. So, it's pretty hard. So you've got to actually really keep your head above water and make sure that all the information that you have is coming out like it's right, it's clear, and we do it the way that we were taught by our ancestors through the heart center. Because if it didn't come from our hearts, then we were just fighting a battle from people that had a dark, with the dark sort of heart, that had no heart for our country. So we had to, pull all of that in, and we had to be able to share this information in a, in a way where people understood that we actually we are obligated by our law and culture to stand up and talk on behalf of the plants, the animals, the people, not only my people, but every child in the future of this, generations to come, because there's so much emissions that are going to come out here. It's not only the rock art that's going to fade, it's going to be people as well. And they've got to, we've got to think that, there's a Paris Agreement and there's all of these things that are happening around the world, but we can't, we've got one giant climate bomb sitting on our doorstep. And, that's that's what this is all about. And for me, it's about, you know, the future of like all children, everyone's kids. It's, you know, my grandkids, it's everybody else's grandkids and great grandkids to come, because if they haven't got health, clean air, and clean water, then what have we got? So, you know, this is the reason why we do it. And especially as women, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, aunties, this is why it was so important for me to, you know, to tell my story. And then, yeah, and then go to ACF so I could share that story all the way around the country, and, you know, with other people as well, with other like-minded women, men who are also, you know, trying to look after country, because, you know, as a woman, we have our law and culture and we do our women's thing, but the men do it as well. And there are men out there that are fighting so hard for their country as well. So I'll never discredit the men, because there are some, you know, lots out there that are, you know, that carry that heart-centered law and culture in their hearts as well. And I know a lot of them, met a lot of them, and, you know, without that unity and that, us coming together through forums like this, then, you know, without this opportunity, we can't get the message across. And so, again, thank you, everybody, for coming, and thanks for listening to everyone, because I think everybody's little stories create this, you know, create the bigger picture of why we're here. So thank you. And yeah, there will be some links, I think, to some of the stuff for Woodside. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Josie. It's such a privilege to hear you share your culture. And yeah, also just the story of your fight. We've dropped in some links so that people can support or learn more about Josie's work and support the campaign. But yeah, we also covered Woodside in our report, and we looked at I guess the impacts, which Rachel will speak to, on communities in Senegal. But yeah, it was very interesting to just hear about the power dynamics your community's up against and what people can do in solidarity. So thank you for sharing. I'll go to Rachel Dobrich now, who's our second speaker. So Rachel is ActionAid Australia's campaign manager, and alongside colleagues and supporters in Australia and internationally, she's working to expose the impacts of the fossil fuel industry on women and communities, and put an end to bank social license for financing fossil fuels. So she'll be sharing how finance to fossil fuel companies is a women's rights issue, which Josie spoke to as well, and how it especially impacts women in the global south. So Rachel, I'll pass over to you.
So much, Kat. And thank you so much again, Josie. As someone who is new to this country, it's such a privilege to hear and learn from you. I think probably all of us on this call, I'm also calling in from stolen land, also the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and sovereignty was never ceded, justice is overdue. And like many of you, I also grew up on stolen land. I grew up in Tamaki Makaurau and Aotearoa, where Ngāti Whātua are mana whenua. And and we at ActionAid believe strongly that colonisation and climate change are inextricably linked, and we need to recognise these connections and dismantle the causes of the injustice that's led to the climate crisis if we're really going to address it. So, women's rights and fossil fuels, why a feminist future is fossil-free. I'll first share a little bit about ActionAid for those who don't know us. So I'm privileged to work as a campaigner at ActionAid, a global federation working for a world free from poverty and injustice. At ActionAid Australia, we empower women on the front lines of injustice to work together and transform their communities. And we believe that collective, effective action is how we change a world built on deep-rooted systemic patriarchy. We also know that women are on the front lines leading their communities through these crises and through climate catastrophe. And we work globally in over 70 countries, and ActionAid Australia alone works in 18. So our goal as ActionAid Australia is to shift power to enable women on the front lines of the climate crisis to drive locally led solutions and systems change. And so as part of that, we recognise that climate change is a women's rights issue. At the rate we're going, according to UN Women, we're 300 years away from achieving gender equality, and the fossil fuel-driven climate crisis is one of the key threats to us achieving that goal. Women and children are 14 times more likely to die in a climate disaster. And when disasters like cyclones and floods hit communities, women face food and water insecurity, they're pushed further into poverty, and they experience more gender-based violence. And I'm sure that those of you on the call know we don't have to look far to see those impacts. The Pacific region is one of the hardest hit by climate impacts. Sea level rise is affecting crop growth and local food security. More frequent and extreme disasters like cyclones are devastating communities. And we also know that in situations of emergency, women are more likely to put others' needs, like children's, ahead of their own when resources like food and water are scarce. More and more communities face being displaced by climate disasters, leaving women among the most vulnerable to facing violence and losing their livelihoods. And when it comes to planning for and trying to respond to the impacts of climate change, women don't have access to a lot of the processes where decisions are made that affect them. And these same impacts are experienced around the world, not just in the Pacific, most significantly in countries that were colonized, that are poorer, and that have contributed the least to causing climate change. So unless we put an end to fossil fuel expansion and transition away from fossil fuels, these climate impacts on women will continue and they'll worsen. So fossil fuels and fossil fuel financing are also a women's rights issue. For decades, the fossil fuel industry has violated the rights of women, of people who live in communities where their coal, oil, and gas projects are operating. In the Niger Delta, communities that we work with in ActionAid have been devastated by decades of oil and gas extraction operations by Shell, and you can see some of that infrastructure in that photo there. Oil spills have contaminated drinking water, destroyed soil fertility, stunting the crops. The decimated fish populations, a key source of sustenance for local communities, and also resulting in the loss of countless livelihoods from fishing, and a sharp rise in hunger for local people. And pollution and gas flaring from Shell's operations has also caused significant health impacts, such as rashes from the flaring, residue in the air, infections, respiratory illnesses, and also increased rates of cancer in these communities. And again, all of these impacts are felt more severely by women. For instance, it's disproportionately women who are the ones that have to care for people in their community, or are more likely to care for people in their community who are affected by these health impacts from the fossil fuel industry. Around the world, when men come from outside of the community to work on fossil fuel companies' projects, women face increased rates of gender-based and sexual violence. Women are usually, again, excluded from land ownership and decision-making. So when fossil fuel companies come to expropriate land, they have less power to influence the decisions around what those projects look like. But ironically, these women are also more likely to be farmers and food producers. They're the people who make sure that their communities have access to clean water. And so they're the ones who are often the most impacted when land is taken or when there's environmental damage from coal, oil, and gas extraction, and it undermines food and water security. So again, these impacts aren't just unique to the Niger Delta. They're seen around the world as impacts of the fossil fuel industry, and they're especially clear in the global south, where communities have less resources to resist. So last year, we compiled a report called Financing Climate Destruction, which showed how Australian banks are directly enabling the expansion of Santos and Woodside, especially in the global south, harming women's rights. And the big four Australian banks, ANZ, Westpac, NAB, and CBA, have provided over $5.1 billion since 2016 just to Santos and Woodside. It's the sort of influence we don't want Australia to have. It's Australian banks financing Australian fossil fuel companies to expand their operations and their damaging impacts in the global south. Woodside is the first company that is operating an offshore oil project in Senegal, Sangomar, and it produced its first oil in the middle of last year. So again, this means an Australian-owned company is having a huge influence and moving Senegal to reliance on fossil fuels at a time that internationally we should be transitioning away from them. Offshore oil in Senegal is a huge threat to the livelihoods of people working in the fishing industry, which is a really significant source of income for women along the coast of Senegal. And it's women that work in fish processing. They're not necessarily going out on boats, they're processing fish when they come back to shore. And it tends to be pretty precarious, informal work that isn't unionized. And so even if Woodside is doing local community consultation, they often have no formal representation in those discussions and no way to express their concerns. So I would also wanted to show one of the graphs from our report. As Kat said, experts are really clear there's no room for any new fossil fuels in a 1.5 degree future, but Woodside's planned oil and gas expansion in Senegal alone would produce 5.6 times the emissions the whole country currently produces in a year. And in Timor Leste, another project would produce an astonishing 16.7 times the amount. Santos has plans for gas expansion in Papua New Guinea that would double the country's current annual emissions. And in the next slide, you'll see that Woodside and Santos's projects also dwarf the emissions of countries across the Pacific. We often hear that it's the countries that have done the least to cause the climate crisis that are the ones that face the most significant impacts. But as you can see, it's not just an inequality between countries, but individual companies are having huge disproportionate impacts on the climate crisis. So to put the scale of Australian banks' investment into perspective, on average, every year since the Paris Agreement, Australian banks have provided almost 6 times as much money to the fossil fuel industry as it would cost for 8 Pacific countries to entirely transition to renewable energy and have energy independence. It's really clear that we need to fix the finance and we need to change the way that finance is flowing. So what do? We need to organise. We know that people power works. And so at ActionAid, we're starting by targeting one of the worst in Australia. ANZ has given more money to fossil fuels than any other Australian bank, more than $20 billion from when the Paris Agreement was signed to early 2024. And last year in May, they said that they were going to rule out financing to fossil fuel projects, but frankly, that's not good enough because in 2023, 98% of banks' fossil fuel lending was through corporate loans, just direct loans to companies to use as they please, and thanks to market forces for that analysis. So we're calling on ANZ to clean up their act and end financing to fossil fuel companies now. You can scan the QR code there, and we'll also put the link in the chat if you want to add your name to the letter that we're sending to ANZ. So together, we can act and have an impact to demand the fossil-free feminist future that we want. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm really interested and excited for your questions and looking forward to the extra discussion and what I'm going to hear from Kyle as well.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, thank you for sharing the impacts of the fossil fuel industry and Australian companies on our partners, and also talking about how much of this financing is going to companies. We'll also drop in some links so you can find out more. So, sorry, I do need to find my screen again since I've been toggling, but now I want to turn to Kyle Robertson. So Kyle Robertson's our final speaker. Kyle's the Australian Banks Analyst at Market Forces, conducting research on the fossil fuel finance activity of Australia's major banks, ANZ, Commonwealth, NAB, Westpac and Macquarie, and campaigning for them to stop financing fossil fuel expansion. So Kyle will be speaking about Market Forces' work in campaigning to hold Australian banks to account and how people power is working. And Market Forces is a really wonderful partner for ActionAid, and we've been working closely on this campaign for a little while. So I'll just pull up Kyle's slide and pass over to Kyle.
Thanks so much, Kat. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Josie and Rachel. Really tough acts to follow. Thank you so much, Josie, for sharing your story. It's a really good reminder of what we're fighting for. And Rachel also, providing that analysis of how fossil fuels are impacting communities in the global south. The people who are going to be most affected by climate change is exactly why we do this work. And it's a really timely reminder of the urgency with which we need to act. Having said all that, I'm pretty keen tonight to talk about some positive stuff that's at least happened in the journey with Market Forces. And I kind of decided to speak about this topic in particular because what's happening in a global context around the world right now can feel pretty dispiriting. the political rhetoric, as well as what is happening in terms of decision making, can make it feel like we're quickly sliding towards catastrophe. But I do want to, highlight that people power has worked. It continues to work. It's had massive wins for the climate, and I'm keen to share some examples with you from over the journey at Market Forces. So yeah. Yes, I do just want to give a quick disclaimer that I'm not a financial advisor, and anything in this presentation does not constitute financial advice. So just care to get that out of the way. So who is Market Forces? We started as an organization back in January 2013, had our 10th birthday 2 years ago in 2023. And we started off with a vision for a future where financial institutions would invest money with a high degree of respect for the environment. And we say there that utilizing our money to deliver solutions to major environmental issues. And that's the key part of what Market Forces does. Is this is our money that we're talking about here. Financial institutions are enormous. They have trillions of dollars under management across the world. The world's 60 biggest banks alone have given over $7 trillion to fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement was signed. That's bigger than most economies out there. But that money is people's money. It exists in people's accounts. It's their mortgages. Same with super, or our pension funds, and the insurance companies that we pay. These are all financial institutions that we are customers of, and they use our money to either fund the destruction of the climate, or they can fund the solutions to climate change. And that is exactly what Market Forces has sought to do since it started, was to redirect our money away from the causes of climate change and towards climate solutions, and to empower communities to achieve those goals and bridge that disconnect. So our Australian Banks campaign, which is my job, and has been since I started back in July 2022 now, has existed long before I came to Market Forces. It existed when I had just started uni, actually. So Market Forces' first campaign was the Australian Banks campaign, and it targeted our big four Australian banks, which is ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, NAB, and Westpac. Because we had basically identified that in this country, they were major funders of the fossil fuel industry. And we wanted to empower customers of those banks, and eventually shareholders of those banks, as well as just people who may not be customers of those banks, but want to take action, to have the resources and information they needed to hold these banks to account and to push for change. In the 12 years since 2013, we've had a lot of big wins, but money continues to flow from the banks to companies expanding fossil fuels. As you can see there, in 2023, the big four loaned over $3.5 billion to fossil fuels. That amount was almost half the amount they loaned in 2022. So the general trend is in the right direction. The overall peak in 2018, I think, was around 11 or $12 billion. So the overall trend is certainly in the right direction. However, as you can see there, almost 70% of that still goes to companies with coal, oil, and gas expansion plans. And the overall total since the Paris Agreement is over $60 billion. But having said all that, we have had some significant wins, which I'll quickly go through now. Perhaps one of the biggest wins we've had is with Commonwealth Bank. So Commonwealth Bank, dating back to the signing of the Paris Agreement and the 5 years following that, was Australia's biggest financier of fossil fuels, pouring over $14 billion into that industry. And a lot of that went to not just companies expanding fossil fuels, but even directly to fossil fuel expansion projects themselves. But in recent years, that script has actually been flipped. So in the previous 2 years, 2022 and 2023, CommBank loaned the least to fossil fuels of the big four. It halved its lending to oil and gas extraction between 2022 and 2024. And this was the result of almost 10 years of really concerted community pressure, dating back to when we would organize hundreds of people to do divestment days, where they would cut up their Commonwealth Bank cards, change their accounts, over the years, it got increasingly sophisticated, and we worked with everyday Commonwealth Bank shareholders to effect change. But it was a huge and concerted, constant effort for 10 years to get to this point. But last year, Commonwealth Bank formally announced that it wasn't going to be providing any further finance to oil and gas extraction companies if they couldn't demonstrate that they were aligned with the Paris Agreement. So in effect, this meant that Commonwealth Bank was no longer going to fund companies that had plans to expand oil and gas. And we actually saw that play out when last year Santos approached the Big Four for a refinancing of a massive, almost $1 billion loan, and Commonwealth Bank knocked them back. The other three, unfortunately, still lent to them, but Commonwealth Bank, our biggest bank, has now effectively turned its back on one of its very long-standing fossil fuel clients, which is a great win and credit to this grassroots movement. Also last year, there was a big win with a project called Papua LNG. This would be Papua New Guinea's second ever gas export project. And we've now had the Big Four Australian banks categorically confirm that they're not going to finance this project. That's a huge win because 14 years earlier, the country's first gas project, which was called PNG LNG, actually secured the largest project finance deal of all time. I believe it was around $14 billion. And I love this quote that's from the PNG Petroleum and Energy Minister that says that there was a time not long ago when a project undertaken by ExxonMobil or Total Energies in a new gas project was regarded as a blue chip investment. But now sustained people-powered campaigning has impacted on the ability of banks to finance a project like this. So it wasn't just the Australian banks. The three biggest French banks who have backed Total Energies constantly since the Paris Agreement also said that they wanted nothing to do with this project. So in general, the trend is heading in the right way. This is also one to be extremely proud of, in particular because I've never seen such a good grassroots campaign be run on a bank before. It was, I was just really proud of the movement when this was happening. So this campaign on NAB's relationship with Whitehaven Coal lasted for the better part of a year, and it was really well organized. A huge credit to Tipping Point, who put a lot of the grassroots organizing into their Move Beyond Coal campaign to get this happening. But it was constant. People were at NAB headquarters all the time demanding that they end this relationship with Whitehaven Coal. They were speaking to NAB staff. They were everywhere. They were at their AGMs, and it ended up becoming this inevitability that this relationship couldn't go on because NAB was sustaining so much brand damage over its relationship with Whitehaven Coal. And then in July 2023, it finally was announced that NAB and Westpac had decided not to refinance their loan to Whitehaven, and the loan fell over, ending a loan that had existed for over 10 years. And now Whitehaven does not have access to traditional banks anymore. It has to go to private credit, and it's paying about $300 million extra on interest to access that private credit compared to what it would through traditional banks. So, great result there. Finally, I just wanted to touch on the wins we've had with our shareholder action. Excuse me, sorry, I've got a little thing stuck in my throat. So one of the great things with the work that we do at Market Forces is work with shareholders, everyday shareholders of ASX listed companies in Australia to put climate on the agenda of these massive companies. If you have 100 individual shareholders that come together to sign onto a shareholder resolution, you can put that on the agenda at a company's annual general meeting, and it has to be voted on by all of their shareholders, which is something we have regularly done with the Big Four Australian banks when it comes to their fossil fuel finance, essentially putting in a resolution to the meeting that asks them to demonstrate how their fossil fuel finance is aligned with their supposed commitments to the Paris Agreement. Next one, please. So the end of last year, we actually had a really great result with Westpac in particular. So over 34% of Westpac's total shareholder votes went in favour of a resolution calling on the bank to only provide finance to fossil fuel companies if they could demonstrate that they had a Paris-aligned transition plan. Now, 34% might not sound like a lot in the scheme of things, but 95% of shareholder votes typically go in favour with whatever the board advises shareholders to do. So that means that, you know, over a third of the shareholder votes, including a lot of Australia's biggest super funds, by the way, had to defy the board and vote in favour of this resolution. And that's gone up massively from the year before, which was 21%. So, you know, it keeps jumping. The banks are under increasing pressure from their shareholders, which is also Australia's super funds, which, you know, basically represent Australia's retirement savings, is calling on them to end their relationship with these climate wrecking companies. So really proud of all that work, and really proud of the fact that you know, shareholders have continued to sign up and continued to put resolutions that make these discussions at these annual general meetings. So I'll just wrap up with my top tips for getting involved. Unfortunately, Microsoft PowerPoint has made these all number one when they're supposed to be 1, 2, 3, but you get the message. So my top tips for getting involved would be to subscribe to our mailing list to get campaign updates, and you can get event invitations and also take digital actions to hold the banks to account. Might sound simple, but those are incredibly impactful and powerful. When thousands of people email their bank, the banks definitely take it really seriously, and it does get fed up the chain. The second one would be just share this information with your friends and family. Despite our best efforts, it's still not very well known what the banks are up to. So to spread it and far and as wide as you can is a huge impact for the success of these campaigns. And finally, you can donate to help us keep fighting to push the big banks out of financing fossil fuel expansion once and for all, which we're hoping to achieve very soon, because that's how urgent the climate crisis is. So thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And we'll drop in some links so you can also follow Carl's work and the work of Market Forces, which is very groundbreaking and has achieved a lot of impact. And yes, thanks for sharing also, I guess, in this climate, what we can do with people power. I think that was definitely a theme throughout all the speakers' presentations, the importance of people power and solidarity. So if you do have questions, we do have 5 minutes left, so please do pop them in the chat and I'll have a look. But yes, I guess just to start off with a question to Josie. So you shared a very powerful story about how First Nations communities and people are resisting oil and gas companies and exploitation. How can we, as people who want to stand in solidarity, best support the organising being done by affected communities?
Yeah, I think what I usually tell people is just to, you know, get online and have a look at, you know, things like Save Our Songlines, the Friends of Australian Rock Art, who are doing a lot of work. You know, the Australian Conservation Foundation, we do a lot of work around the campaigning, as well as CCWA as well, which is the Climate Council Western Australia. So we, you know, there are a lot of people working on the ground trying to do this, but I think Save Our Songlines is one of the biggest ones because Ray's still there. She's still kicking on so hard and fighting the good fight. Like she was, you know, on top of a hill the other day, you know, and just giving it to Roger Cook, you know, just because he's up there in Karratha, and just giving it to Roger Cook and them, you know, saying, why hasn't there been any consultation face to face, asking him straight out. And he basically packed his book up and ran away into his car and took off. You know, this is, and, you know, that, and for somebody, you know, who knows, and that's where the support needs to be a lot on the ground as well. So, and Save Our Songlines, I think, does have a website. So if you jump on their website, there is a link there to donate to Save Our Songlines as well. So that's really the grassroots as you can get is right there, and you know, helping Ray with that work, and then, you know, everybody else that are the grassroots that are coming together at that time right now, you know, to be able to go on delegations. We've had some, we've had some really great delegations we've done to Parliament House as well. So it's about, just, and you need money to be able to do that. And, it's, like I said, these, being, with an organization is really fantastic, people to support to get this done, because the voices are what we need. And so we really do need that that support. So not supporting people coming up with their golden shovel, money over country and culture. So yeah.
Thanks, Josie. And Carl, we have a question in the chat, which is it better to divest or to be an active shareholder? What are your thoughts?
Great question. Well, the way that we look at it is that divestment is the last point of call for a particularly difficult target. So, and it's the same thing that we say to super funds, basically, or banks who invest in these companies, because their argument is always, we think it's better that we maintain our investment, or we maintain our lending relationship with this company, so that we can influence them for the better. And our response is, okay, so why do they continue to do things? Why do they continue to expand fossil fuels? Why do they continue to have some of the biggest expansion plans in the world? Why do they continue to destroy cultural heritage, et cetera, et cetera? So I think if that would basically be my advice, is there's a tremendous power in using your capacity as a shareholder activist to influence companies to change for the better. You should use every tool at your disposal to get them to change. However, if you're not having any success, then the best thing you can do is divest, and divest loudly, very loudly. So, yeah.
Thanks. And we've got 2 more questions, which I might also, I've been told we have 15 minutes, so people can stay for an extra 15 minutes. That would be greatly appreciated. So we can just have more time to answer questions. But maybe these 2 questions to you, Kyle. So just on AGMs as well, in South Australia, they have the Santos AGM coming up on 10th of April. Is it worth buying shares to stand up and demand something? Or is there a plan for us to combine to come up with a shareholder resolution? And then also, how can we continue to congratulate CommBank on this movement and push them to do even more?
So I'll start with the first one, which is that there's tremendous, I think there's tremendous power in being a shareholder of fossil fuel companies, because you can continually force climate to be on the agenda, just by signing onto resolutions. So I would always recommend that. I would always recommend getting involved and making sure that your voice is heard and that climate is on the agenda. When it comes to Santos this year, I think we're pushing for their directors to be held to account, i.e. voted off the board, based on the fact that they have overseen a increasingly aggressive oil and gas expansion strategy that shows no signs of slowing down. So that is the work that we've currently got going on. Just last year at Woodside, their climate transition plan had 60% of shareholders voted down, which was a world record at the time. So to have climate-minded shareholders in these companies is tremendously powerful, and it forces the directors to carefully think about the strategy that they're pursuing. What was the second question again, Kat? Sorry.
What's the best way to continue to congratulate CBA and push them to do even more? So I guess you noted that they've decided to not fund gas and oil expansion, but there are loopholes within some of their policies.
Yep, absolutely. So our goal here is to take the good things the Commonwealth Bank has done, the progress that it has made, and apply it across the spectrum. There are definitely still loopholes in Commonwealth Bank's policy. It's not airtight. Probably the biggest loophole that we've identified is that whilst they said that they won't fund oil and gas extraction companies not aligned with Paris, they haven't done anything about pipeline companies. And one of their biggest clients is APA Group, which is Australia's biggest pipeline developer, and a company that's threatening to build pipelines that would unlock our biggest proposed gas development, which is the Beetaloo Basin. So Commonwealth Bank continues to lend to that company, and it's completely at odds with the rest of its approach. So keep the pressure up and keep reminding them of the inconsistency between what they've already committed to versus what the loopholes that they still have in their policy.
Great, thanks. And I guess I have a question to all panelists. I guess all of you have been working on this issue for varying degrees of time. Like our strategies and our tactics evolve. So what have you learned over the years about what works, and what do you think is the pathway forward, given that I think, Josie, you really made clear that we're up against quite big companies that have a lot of power, a lot of resources, a lot of money. We've spoken a bit about people power, but I guess how do you continue to iterate your strategy, your tactics, your plan to continue to get movement from companies and banks? So Rachel, I might go to you first, and then we can go to our Josie and then Carl.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kat. I think for me, one of the most powerful things is the solidarity that we show with each other. And I think that's reflected here in us coming together for this panel and sharing the different perspectives that we bring to this work, but also working for ActionAid, where we're fortunate to have relationships with people in so many communities that are impacted by this crisis around the world, where I think we're more powerful in being able to be persuasive and bringing people on board with this issue because of those stories that we're telling, just like Josie was sharing her experiences. So I think, yeah, that's a big learning for me. We're very fortunate at ActionAid that we're able to work with our local partners to tell their stories around the world. And I'm excited that we've got plans to be doing more of that as well, to share the impacts that they're experiencing.
Rachel, and what do you think, Josie?
Oh, look, I also forgot to mention that get on the ground. If there's a rally to do in anything, do it. If you can get your feet on the ground with, like-minded people who, it's amazing feeling to actually get on the ground and do a rally and fight for something that you really believe in. Because that's where there's passion and there's heart, that's where there's change. And in my theory of change is united we stand. Because like Rachel said, the stories that come from all around the world are important. And when we start to share those stories and when we start to create change that way, people start to wake up and realize that the very earth that I'm going to stand on tomorrow morning when I get out of bed may not be here. So that's where motivation comes from, to be able to survive. It's a survival technique. And we're in survival mode right now because we are, drastic measures call for drastic times, and we've got to, information sharing is the key, and getting out there and put your boots on and go to a rally and just go and just be involved in things that that are there in your area or anywhere. So yeah.
Thanks, Josie. And Carl?
I definitely echo Josie's sentiments about the power of grassroots movement and the power of boots on the ground. And I've seen a lot of things over my time at Market Forces, and it just continues to inspire me. But I would say that within the grassroots movement on the ground, I think what I've learned the most is the power of corporate campaigning, to be honest, which is politics can be all encompassing at times. And it tends to suck in, a variety of actors, powerful actors and grassroots movements. And at times it can feel like it's tilted in the favor of those who seek to destroy the climate, who seek to destroy cultural heritage, who seek to, quite frankly, tear us apart as a community. But I think what I've learned through corporate campaigning is that outside of the election cycle, outside of the political process, you can have tremendous power to affect change. And I think I've seen that this year perhaps the most, which is that at least the coalition is clearly waking up to what is happening with the banks. and is clearly waking up to the effect that it's having on their fossil fuel donor companies, the negative effects that it's having. And we've seen even this year that eight coalition MPs have written to the banks, putting them on notice, saying if we get into power, we expect you to reverse course and blah blah blah. I suppose the main thing I want to say is that outside of that, when you direct your attention towards these corporate targets, you can influence the thing that influences politics, if that makes sense. So we can have a lot of change. We can impact these companies in ways that boggle the mind how many different ways there are to take action. So that would be my main takeaway.
Thanks. And I think you all have shared really creative ways that the movement keeps coming up with to campaign banks and companies to get them to respect the rights of people and stop funding fossil fuels. And as John Smith says, action is the antidote to despair, which is a great thing to end on. I think we might leave it there and finish early. Just want to thank the panel again. So Josie Alec, Rachel Dobrich and Carl Robertson for sharing their deep knowledge on this issue and their insights. We're very grateful to the Australian Conservation Foundation, ActionAid Australia and Market Forces for supporting this event, and Climate Action Week Sydney. And we hope you've all learned something and take action on these campaigns. So be sure to follow the links that we've popped in the chat to keep on top of the work that these wonderful organisations are doing. And together we can stand in solidarity with women, First Nations communities and affected communities to stop the impacts of continued fossil fuel financing. So thanks again to everyone who came. And yes, sending everyone thoughts and love. Bye, everyone.